What are you hiding from me, Barmy? Why must you go to that river every night? Why?
You don't understand. If I don't go tonight, if I miss even one night, he will vanish.
The bedroom door was locked from the outside. Barmy's hands trembled as she twisted the handle again and again, her breath coming fast, her heart pounding like drums in her chest. The clock on the wall showed 7:52 p.m. 8 minutes. She had only 8 minutes left. Femi, please open this door. Please. Her voice cracked as she banged her palms against the wood, the sound echoing through the silent house. On the other side, Pastor Femi stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with frustration and suspicion. He had watched her for weeks now. Every night at exactly 8 p.m., his wife would take baby Ralph, wrap him in that strange blue cloth, and disappear toward the Solva River. Every single night. No matter the weather. No matter how tired she was. What are you hiding from me, Barmy? His voice was low, controlled, but there was anger beneath it. Why must you go to that river every night? Why? Barmy pressed her forehead against the door, tears streaming down her face. Baby Ralph was in her arms, wrapped tightly against her chest, his small eyes blinking up at her in confusion. Outside, the sky had begun to darken. Storm clouds gathered overhead. Rain was coming. You don't understand, she cried, her voice breaking into sobs. If I don't go tonight, if I miss even one night, he will vanish. Ralph will disappear. Please, Femi. Please open the door. Pastor Femi's hand hovered over the key in his pocket. Her words made no sense. Vanish. Disappear. What kind of madness was this? He was a man of God. A shepherd of souls. And his wife was speaking like someone under a curse. Then tell me the truth, he shouted back. Tell me what you've been doing out there. Tell me why you sing those strange songs. That is not a church hymn, Barmy. That is something else. Inside the room, Barmy sank to her knees, clutching Ralph tighter. Her whole body shook. The clock now read 7:55 p.m. 5 minutes. She was running out of time. The promise she had made by the Solva River was not something she could break. It was not something she could explain in words that made sense. It was a promise born from 8 years of pain. 8 years of emptiness. 8 years of shame. I made a deal. She whispered through the door, her voice barely audible. I made a deal because I wanted a child. Because I was dying inside. Because you were going to replace me. There was silence on the other side. Pastor Femi's heart stopped. His hand froze. Replace her? How did she know? He had been so careful. So quiet. The conversations with the church elders about taking a second wife had been private, discreet, done in whispers behind closed doors. But somehow she had found out. Barmy. His voice softened, guilt creeping into his tone. Barmy, you were planning to marry another woman. Barmy screamed, her voice filled with raw agony. After 8 years of praying together. After 8 years of standing beside you in that church. You were going to throw me away like I was nothing. The clock struck 7:58 p.m. 2 minutes left. Barmy's sobs turned into desperate gasps. She could feel it. The pull. The invisible thread that connected her to the river. The voice that had whispered to her that night 8 years ago, the voice that had promised her a child if only she obeyed. And she had obeyed. Every single night for the past 73 days, she had obeyed. Please. She begged, her voice breaking completely. Please, Femi. I will tell you everything. I will explain everything. But right now I need to go. Or we will lose him. Pastor Femi's hands shook as he pulled the key from his pocket. Something in her voice. Something in the rawness of her pain. It cut through his pride, his anger, his confusion. He didn't understand what was happening. But he could hear the terror in her voice. Real terror. Not manipulation. Not lies. Terror. The lock clicked. The door flew open. Barmy didn't wait. She didn't stop to look at him. She didn't stop to explain. She just ran.
Wait, before I continue, like this video, subscribe and comment where you are watching from. So watch till the end of this story to know the truth that she was hiding.
Her bare feet slapped against the cold floor as she bolted through the house. Ralph clutched tightly in the blue wrapper against her chest. The front door slammed open, and she disappeared into the night. Pastor Femi stood in the doorway, frozen, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Outside, the rain had begun to fall. Soft at first, then harder. The wind picked up, bending the trees, howling through the compound. And through the rain, he saw her. A small figure running desperately toward the path that led to the Sulva River, her wrapper flapping behind her, the blue cloth glowing faintly in the dim light of the rising moon. "What have you done, Barmy?" he whispered to himself. "What have you done?" But even as he asked the question, something inside him, something deep and unsettling, told him to follow her. Not to stop her. Not to drag her back. But to see. To witness. To understand. He stepped out into the rain. His shirt clung to his body as the water soaked through. His shoes squelched in the mud. But he kept walking, slowly, carefully, staying in the shadows, following the path his wife had taken. The path that led through the tall grass, past the old mango tree, down the slope, toward the sound of rushing water. Ahead, through the rain and the darkness, he saw her. She was kneeling by the edge of the Sulva River, her back to him, baby Ralph held high above her head. The blue wrapper hung loosely around the child, flapping gently in the wind. And then, she began to sing. It was not a song Pastor Femi had ever heard before. It was not Yoruba. It was not English. It was not any language spoken in the church or in the village. The melody was ancient, haunting, rising and falling like the river itself. Her voice trembled with emotion, but the words were clear, deliberate, spoken with reverence and fear. Pastor Femi's blood ran cold. He pressed himself against a tree, hidden in the shadows, watching. His wife. The woman he had married. The woman who had stood beside him at the altar. Was performing some kind of ritual. Under the moon. By the river. With their son. "Who are you, Barmy?" he whispered into the rain. "Who are you?" But she didn't hear him. She was lost in the song. Lost in the moment. And as she sang, something strange happened. The rain around her seemed to slow. The wind seemed to calm. And for just a moment. Just a brief, impossible moment. Pastor Femi thought he saw something move in the water. A ripple. A shape. A presence. Then it was gone. Barmy lowered Ralph back into her arms, kissed his forehead gently, and wrapped him tightly in the blue cloth. She stood, turned, and began walking back toward the house, her face wet with rain and tears, her body exhausted. Pastor Femi stepped back deeper into the shadows, letting her pass without seeing him. His mind raced. His heart pounded. What had he just witnessed? What kind of woman had he married? And more importantly, what kind of deal had she made? He waited until she was far ahead, then he followed her back to the house in silence, his soul heavy with questions he didn't know how to ask. The next morning, the sun rose over the compound, bright and warm, as if the storm had never happened. Barmy moved quietly through the house, preparing breakfast, feeding Ralph, acting as though nothing had changed. But Pastor Femi could not eat. He sat at the table, staring at her, his mind replaying the scene from the night before over and over again. "Barmy," he finally said, his voice low. "We need to talk." She didn't look at him. She just continued wiping Ralph's mouth, her hands moving mechanically, her face blank. "There is nothing to talk about," she replied softly. "Nothing to talk about." Pastor Femi's voice rose slightly. "You ran out into a storm last night. You performed some kind of ritual by the river. And you expect me to just pretend I didn't see it." Barmy finally looked at him. Her eyes were red, tired, but there was something else in them. Something hard. Something that hadn't been there before. "You locked me in that room," she said quietly. You tried to stop me from keeping my promise. And you almost made me lose him. Lose him. Pastor Femi stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. What are you talking about? Ralph is right here. He's not going anywhere. Because I went to the river. Barmy's voice cracked. Because I kept my promise. If I had missed last night, if I had stayed locked in that room, Ralph would be gone, and you would never have seen him again. Pastor Femi stared at her, his breath caught in his throat. Gone. Vanished. It sounded insane. It sounded like the words of a woman who had lost her mind. But the fear in her eyes, the conviction in her voice, it was real. Then tell me, he said slowly, sitting back down. Tell me everything. From the beginning. And so she did. Barmy sat down across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her voice barely above a whisper. Baby Ralph slept peacefully in the wooden crib beside her, unaware of the storm brewing between his parents. 8 years, Femi. She began, her eyes fixed on the table. 8 years I prayed. 8 years I fasted. 8 years I stood in that church every Sunday, smiling at the members, leading the women's fellowship, pretending that my heart wasn't breaking into pieces. Pastor Femi said nothing. He just listened, his jaw tight, his hands clasped together. Do you know what it feels like? Barmy continued, her voice trembling. Do you know what it feels like to watch every woman in the congregation carry their babies? To see them dedicate their children at the altar? To hear them testify about God's faithfulness? While your own womb remains empty. Her voice broke, and tears began streaming down her face again. I heard the whispers, Femi. I heard what they said about me. Maybe she's cursed. Maybe she offended God. Maybe the pastor should find another wife. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain. And then I found out. I found out that you were actually planning to do it. That you were meeting with Mr. Bolu and the other elders. Discussing how to bring another woman into this house. Pastor Femi looked away, guilt washing over his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I felt like I was dying, Femi. I felt like everything I had lived for, everything I had believed in, was being taken away from me. Barmy wiped her tears with the back of her hand. So I started going to the Sulva River. Just to be alone. Just to cry where no one could see me. She paused, her breathing heavy, her hands shaking. And that's when I heard the voice. Pastor Femi's head snapped up. What voice? It was soft. Gentle. Like a woman's voice. Barmy's eyes grew distant, as if she were back at that moment. I thought I was imagining it at first. But then it spoke again. If you want a child, I will give you one. But you must obey. Pastor Femi's blood ran cold. You made a deal with something at the river. I was desperate. Barmy cried out, her voice filled with anguish. I was broken. I didn't know what else to do. The voice told me. It told me that if I wanted a child, I would have to bring the baby to the river every night at exactly 8 p.m. for 90 days. I would have to bathe the baby, wrap him in a blue cloth, lift him toward the sky, and sing the song it taught me. She looked down at Ralph, her face softening. And it said that if I missed even one night, the child would vanish, disappear as if he never existed. Pastor Femi stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward with a loud crash. Do you hear yourself? He shouted, his voice echoing through the house. Do you hear what you're saying? You made a pact with what? A demon. A spirit. And you brought that thing's curse into our home. It wasn't a curse. Barmy stood up as well, her own voice rising to match his. It was a blessing. Look at him. Look at Ralph. He is healthy. He is strong. He is everything I prayed for. He is a product of witchcraft. Pastor Femi roared, his face red with anger and fear. You have defiled this house. You have defiled our ministry. How can I stand in that pulpit and preach about faith when my own wife has gone to the river to make deals with demons? Barmy's face hardened. Faith, she said bitterly. You want to talk to me about faith. Where was your faith when you decided to replace me? Where was your faith when you gave up on God answering our prayers and started planning to marry another woman? The words hit Pastor Femi like a slap. He stood there, speechless, his chest heaving with emotion. I did what I had to do to survive. Barmy said quietly, her voice cold now. And I will continue to do what I have to do to keep my son. She picked up Ralph from the crib, wrapped him securely in her arms, and walked past her husband without another word, heading toward the bedroom. Pastor Femi stood alone in the sitting room, his world crumbling around him. Everything he had built, his reputation, his ministry, his image as a man of God, all of it was now tainted by the secret his wife had just revealed. And the worst part, he didn't know what to do about it. The days that followed were filled with tension and silence. Pastor Femi barely spoke to Barmy. He moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding her eyes, avoiding Ralph, spending long hours alone in his study, praying, fasting, searching the scriptures for answers that never came. But every night, at exactly 8 p.m., Barmy would take Ralph, wrap him in the blue cloth, and walk toward the Solva River. And every night, Pastor Femi would watch her go, his heart heavy with dread and confusion. On the third day after their confrontation, Brother Joseph came to the house. Brother Joseph was one of the most active members of the church, a man who handled the sound system, arranged the chairs, and always arrived early for every service. He was also known for being observant. Perhaps too observant. Some said he had a habit of listening to conversations that didn't concern him. Good afternoon, Pastor. Brother Joseph greeted as he entered the sitting room, his eyes darting around nervously. I hope I'm not disturbing you, sir. Pastor Femi looked up from his Bible, exhaustion written all over his face. What is it, Brother Joseph? Brother Joseph shifted uncomfortably, wringing his hands together. Well, sir, it's just that. I heard something the other night. Something that's been troubling my spirit. Pastor Femi's stomach tightened. What did you hear? I was passing by your house, sir, on my way home from evening prayers, and I couldn't help but hear raised voices. Brother Joseph's voice dropped to a whisper. I heard Sister Barmy saying something about a river, and a deal, and the baby disappearing. Pastor Femi closed his eyes, dread washing over him. Of course someone had heard. In a community where walls were thin and secrets were rare, nothing stayed hidden for long. Brother Joseph. Pastor Femi began, trying to keep his voice steady. What you heard. It's a private family matter. I would appreciate it if you kept it to yourself. But Brother Joseph shook his head, his face filled with concern. Pastor. With all due respect, sir. This is not just a family matter. If what I heard is true, if Sister Barmy has been involved in spiritual things, then the entire church needs to know. We need to pray. We need to fast. We need to deliver her. No. Pastor Femi stood up quickly. No, Brother Joseph. We will handle this privately. There is no need to involve the church. But it was too late. The seed had been planted. And Brother Joseph, with all his good intentions and misplaced zeal, was not the type of man to keep quiet about something he believed was a spiritual emergency. That Sunday, the church was unusually full. Word had spread. Whispers had circulated. People had heard fragments of the story, twisted and exaggerated, passed from mouth to mouth like wildfire. By the time Pastor Femi stood behind the pulpit, the entire congregation was buzzing with curiosity and judgment. Barmy sat in her usual seat in the front row, Ralph sleeping peacefully in her arms, unaware of the storm that was about to break. Pastor Femi tried to preach. He opened his Bible, cleared his throat, and began speaking about faith and perseverance. But his words felt hollow. His voice lacked conviction. And he could feel the eyes of the congregation on him, watching, waiting, questioning. Halfway through the sermon, Brother Joseph stood up. The entire church fell silent. Pastor. Brother Joseph's voice rang out, loud and clear. Pastor, I have a question. Pastor Femi's heart sank. Brother Joseph, please sit down. This is not the time. No, Pastor. Brother Joseph stepped forward, his face flushed with emotion. The Holy Spirit is telling me to speak. The church needs to know the truth. We need to address the spiritual contamination that has entered this house of God. Gasps rippled through the congregation. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Barmy's hands tightened around Ralph. She knew. She knew what was coming. What are you talking about, Brother Joseph? Mr. Bolu, the church elder, stood up, his voice firm. This is highly inappropriate. I'm talking about Sister Barmy. Brother Joseph pointed directly at her, his finger trembling. I'm talking about the fact that she has been going to the Sulva River every night. I'm talking about the fact that she made a deal with a water spirit to get that baby. I'm talking about the fact that our pastor's wife is practicing witchcraft. The church erupted into chaos. Voices shouted. People stood up. Some cried out in shock. Others began praying loudly in tongues. The ushers tried to restore order, but the damage was done. The secret was out. And there was no taking it back. Pastor Femi stood frozen behind the pulpit, his face pale, his hands gripping the wooden edges so tightly his knuckles turned white. And then, Barmy stood up. The church fell silent again, all eyes on her. She stood there, holding Ralph, her face calm, her eyes dry. She had cried all her tears already. There were none left. She walked slowly toward the altar, her footsteps echoing in the silence. When she reached the front, she turned to face the congregation. It's true, she said simply. The church gasped again, louder this time. It's true. Barmy repeated, her voice steady. I went to the Sulva River. I heard a voice. And I made a promise in exchange for a child. Sister Barmy. Mr. Bolu stepped forward, his face filled with concern and horror. Do you know what you're saying? Do you understand the gravity of? I understand perfectly. Barmy interrupted him, her voice growing stronger. I understand that I spent 8 years praying. 8 years believing. 8 years waiting for God to answer. And when he didn't. When my husband decided to replace me. When I had nothing left. I made a choice. She looked directly at Pastor Femi, her eyes piercing through him. And yes, I have been going to the river every night, bathing my son, wrapping him in a blue cloth, singing a song I don't fully understand, because that was the condition. And I have kept my promise for 76 days now. Only 14 more to go. 76 days, someone in the congregation shouted. You've been doing this for 76 days. Yes. Barmy said calmly. And I will continue for 14 more. Because I will not lose my son. Pastor Femi finally found his voice. Barmy. Stop. Please stop talking. His voice was filled with desperation and shame. But Barmy didn't stop. She turned back to the congregation, her voice ringing out clearly. You all want to judge me, she said, her eyes sweeping across the faces staring at her. You all want to call me a witch. Fine. Call me what you want. But ask yourselves this. What would you have done? If you were in my position? If you were barren for 8 years? If your husband was planning to replace you? If you had no hope left? What would you have done? The church was silent now. Uncomfortable. No one had an answer. I didn't go looking for evil. Barmy continued, tears finally beginning to stream down her face. I went looking for hope. I went looking for a reason to keep living. And yes, maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I should have waited longer. Maybe I should have had more faith. But I was dying inside. And I just wanted to be a mother. Her voice broke completely, and she sank to her knees on the altar, sobbing, clutching Ralph tightly to her chest. The congregation sat in stunned silence. Some women began to cry. Others looked away, unable to face the raw pain they were witnessing. Pastor Femi stepped down from the pulpit, his face twisted with anger, humiliation, and something else. Something that looked like grief. He walked toward Barmy, his footsteps slow and heavy. When he reached her, he didn't help her up. He didn't comfort her. Instead, he spoke loudly, his voice filled with cold fury. "You have disgraced me," he said, his words cutting through the silence like a knife. "You have disgraced this ministry. You have disgraced this church. You have disgraced the name of God himself." Barmy looked up at him, her face wet with tears, but her eyes no longer pleading. They were resigned. Accepting. "If you refuse to repent, if you refuse to renounce this demonic covenant," Pastor Femi's voice shook with emotion, "then we shall go our separate ways. I cannot, I will not be associated with this abomination any longer." Mr. Bolu stepped forward quickly. "Pastor, please, let us not make rash decisions. Let us pray about this. Let us seek counsel." But Pastor Femi shook his head, his decision already made. "There is nothing to pray about, Mr. Bolu. My mind is made up." He turned and walked out of the church, leaving Barmy kneeling at the altar, still holding Ralph, still crying, the congregation staring at her in shock and pity. That night, Barmy did not return to the house. She stayed with a friend from the church, a quiet woman named Sister Adunni who had always been kind to her. And at exactly 8 p.m., despite everything that had happened, despite the humiliation and the judgment and the pain, Barmy took Ralph to the Sulva River, bathed him, wrapped him in the blue cloth, and sang the song. Because she had made a promise. And she would keep it. The next morning, when Barmy finally returned to the house to collect her things, she found a brown envelope waiting for her on the dining table. Divorce papers. Pastor Femi had wasted no time. The documents were already signed, already notarized, already official. All she had to do was add her signature, and the marriage would be over. She picked up the envelope with trembling hands, stared at it for a long moment, then slowly opened it. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes once again. 8 years of marriage. 8 years of partnership. 8 years of standing by his side. Reduced to a piece of paper and a signature. She signed it. Not because she wanted to, but because she was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of begging. Tired of trying to hold on to something that was already broken. She packed her clothes, gathered Ralph's things, and left the house without looking back. The days that followed were the hardest of Barmy's life. She moved into a small rented room on the outskirts of town, far from the church, far from the whispers, far from the judgment. She had no job, no income, no support system. Just herself and Ralph. But every night, at exactly 8 p.m., she went to the Sulva River. 77 days. 78. 79. 80. The countdown continued. Some nights it rained. Some nights the path was muddy and difficult. Some nights she was so tired she could barely walk. But she never missed a night. Not once. People in the new neighborhood began to notice. They saw the young woman with the baby, wrapped in blue cloth, walking toward the river every evening. They whispered too. But Barmy didn't care anymore. Let them whisper. Let them judge. She had already lost everything. She had nothing left to protect. On the 85th night, something changed. As Barmy knelt by the river, holding Ralph toward the sky, singing the song, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not happiness. Not joy. But peace. A quiet, deep acceptance of her circumstances. She looked down at Ralph, his tiny face illuminated by the moonlight, and she whispered to him, "You are mine. You are truly mine. And no one, not your father, not the church, not even the river, can take you away from me now." The final 5 nights passed quickly. 86. 87. 88. 89. And then, finally, the 90th night arrived. Barmy stood by the Sulva River one last time, Ralph in her arms, the blue cloth wrapped around him. She bathed him carefully, lovingly, then lifted him high toward the night sky. And for the final time, she sang the song. But this time, as she sang, she felt it. A release. A severing. Like an invisible thread that had been tied around her heart for 90 days had suddenly been cut. The song ended. The river was silent. No voice spoke. No presence appeared. Nothing moved in the water. Barmy slowly lowered Ralph back into her arms, wrapped him tightly, and stood up. She waited for a moment, half expecting something to happen. But nothing did. Ralph remained. Healthy. Whole. Hers. She smiled through her tears, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "You didn't disappear. You stayed. You're really mine." And for the first time in 90 days, Barmy walked away from the Sulva River without fear.
The moral lesson of this story states, the desperation is a powerful force. It can drive us to the edge of reasons, make us to question everything we believe, and push us to make choices we never imagined we would make. But truth
What are you hiding from me,
that we
Barmy?
must remember is
Why
that
must you go to
desperation
that
does not
river
define
every
us.
night?
What we do after desperation, that is what defines us. Mrs. Barmy made a choice born from pain. Was it right or was it wrong? This is not for us to judge. What matters is when the storm passed, she chose to move forward. She chose to turn her pain into purpose. And in doing so, she became more than a pastor's wife, more than a woman who made a deal at the river. She became a testimony to the resilience of human spirit. If this story have touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and tell us in the comment section where you are watching from. And remember, you are stronger than you think. Thank you for watching.